It was a night meant to mark the beginning of forever. She had imagined it 1,000 times, the glowing chandeliers, the soft music playing in the background, the vows exchanged under the twinkling stars. But instead of the fairy tale she had envisioned, reality was unfolding in a way that no one could ever have predicted. Lila stood in front of the grand wooden door to the honeymoon suite, her heart racing in her chest. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of expectations, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had just gotten married to the man of her dreams, at least, that's what she had thought. But now, as she waited for him to open the door, a gnawing suspicion lingered at the back of her mind. The way he had looked at her earlier in the evening, distant, distracted, had bothered her. He had been so charming at the ceremony, the perfect gentleman in front of the guests. But once they had said their vows, things had shifted. His warmth seemed to melt away, replaced by something cold and calculating. She had shaken it off. After all, it was their wedding night, and this was supposed to be the happiest moment of their lives. Lila had spent weeks preparing for this night, selecting the perfect dress, choosing the right flowers, rehearsing her vows until they were flawless. She had put so much effort into making everything perfect. How could it be going wrong now? A sharp breath escaped her lips as she heard a soft chuckle from inside the room. Her body froze. The laughter wasn't coming from her husband. It wasn't the kind of playful, happy laughter she had expected on their wedding night. It was colder, mocking. It sent a chill through her body as it echoed through the door, followed by more laughter, and then a soft, familiar voice. "Stop teasing me," the voice said. "This is getting ridiculous." Lila's heart pounded in her ears, her grip tightening on the doorknob. She didn't know what to think. She knew she shouldn't be listening in, but something pulled her in, a magnetic force that made it impossible to turn away. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she pressed her ear against the door. She could hear the sound of rustling fabric, followed by another laugh, this time, louder. Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, to not get caught in whatever was happening inside. But her feet refused to move. Something inside her snapped. She swung open the door, the room illuminated in soft candlelight. Her eyes locked onto the scene before her, and for a moment, her mind went blank. There they were, her husband, Daniel, and a woman. A woman whose face she didn't recognize. The woman was standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around Daniel's waist, her lips brushing against his neck. They were laughing, oblivious to Lila standing in the doorway, as if everything was perfectly normal. As if she was invisible. Lila's throat tightened, and her breath caught in her chest. The sight before her was not what she had imagined. The fantasy she had built in her mind, of the man she had trusted, the man she had married, was shattering right before her eyes. "What is this?" Lila managed to whisper, her voice trembling. She felt as though her feet were glued to the floor, her legs unable to move, her body paralyzed by shock. Daniel turned to face her, a look of mild surprise on his face, as if he hadn't expected her to show up. His eyes shifted briefly to the woman in his arms before he met Lila's gaze again, his expression unreadable. "Oh, Lila," he said slowly, the words leaving his mouth like they were nothing more than a casual observation. "You're finally here. Finally here." Those words rang in her ears as if they were some kind of sick joke. The woman, now stepping away from him, glanced at Lila with an air of indifference, as though it was nothing out of the ordinary. Lila's mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening, but everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Her husband, her new husband, was standing there, his arms loosely hanging by his sides, as though he didn't care. "What's going on, Daniel?" Lila's voice cracked, and she felt a hot tear escape from her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. Daniel sighed, glancing over his shoulder at the woman before turning back to Lila. He appeared calm, too calm. As if this were just another part of his life. "You really want to know?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Lila nodded, desperate for answers. Yes, I want to know. What is this? Who is she? Daniel's lips curled into a thin smile, and for the first time since they had met, Lila felt a chill run down her spine. This is my other partner, he said, the words coming out slowly, as if he were explaining something trivial. I brought her here tonight to celebrate. To show you what true loyalty looks like. Lila's mind went blank again. The room seemed to close in around her. She couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating. Celebrate, she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. You're saying this is how you celebrate our wedding night? Daniel's smile faded, and he shrugged, his expression unreadable. I never promised you a fairy tale, Lila. You never asked the right questions. The woman, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Her voice was smooth, almost too smooth. It's not personal, darling. This is just how he likes to keep things interesting. He has his needs, you know. You can't expect him to settle for one woman when he can have everything. Lila's vision blurred as the woman's words hit her like a slap across the face. The bitterness in the woman's tone, the casual cruelty in her words, made Lila's stomach twist. But it wasn't just the woman's words that cut deep, it was Daniel's indifference, his complete disregard for her feelings. In that moment, everything she had believed about him.
The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart, crumbled. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a trophy to show off at his convenience. Lila didn't know what to do. Her hands were shaking, her legs weak beneath her. The world around her felt distant, like she was watching everything through a foggy window. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. How could you do this? Lila whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the woman, his hand brushing her hair affectionately. I'm sorry, Lila, but this is who I am. You've always known that, deep down. Lila's mind was reeling, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out the only question that mattered. What do you want from me? Why did you marry me if you were already seeing her? Daniel looked at her with a mixture of boredom and amusement. You were convenient. You fit the role I needed you to. But don't worry, Lila. I'm sure we can find a way to make this work. The room spun as Lila tried to process his words. What did he mean by make this work? Her heart felt like it was breaking in 1,000 pieces, and the one person who should have been there to catch her was the one responsible for shattering her world. Before she could say another word, the woman spoke up again, her voice cold. You should go, darling. You're not welcome here anymore. Lila stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest like a boulder. She didn't know whether to stay and confront the truth or walk away from the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. But as she stood there, staring at the two of them, her husband and his mistress, something inside her shifted. The tears, the hurt, the betrayal, they all began to fade into something else. Something colder. Something that would drive her to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Lila turned her back on them and walked out of the room. But this was just the beginning. The story wasn't over yet. And in the coming days, she would uncover secrets that would change her life forever. Lila barely made it to the hallway before the tears came. They fell freely now, no longer held back by her usual restraint. She had been so strong for so long, but tonight had shattered that strength in a way she never anticipated. Her wedding night, meant to be the most joyous occasion, had turned into a nightmare. She could still hear the laughter from the room, the cruel words Daniel had spoken, echoing in her ears. As she stumbled down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind was in turmoil. How had she not seen this coming? How had she been so blind to the man she married? The man who, it seemed, was nothing like the charming, sweet person he had portrayed during their courtship. Her breath was ragged as she pushed through the grand front doors of the estate, stepping out into the cool night air.
It was as though she needed to distance herself from the suffocating atmosphere inside the house, away from the lies, the betrayal, the reality of it all. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the gardens. Lila stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The whole night seemed unreal, like a scene from some dark, twisted dream. She couldn't wrap her mind around Daniel's indifference, the way he had so coldly dismissed her feelings. She had trusted him. She had given him everything. And yet, he had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. It wasn't just the affair, though that was enough to crush her, it was the way he had treated her. The way he had treated their marriage. To him, it was just a game. A convenience. She had been a pawn, nothing more. But as much as it hurt, something deeper began to form inside her, a burning resolve, an instinctual need to find the truth. She couldn't just walk away. She couldn't let him win. She had to know why. Why had he done this? Why had he married her in the first place, if he had no intention of being faithful? What was he hiding? As Lila stood there, the night air cool against her flushed skin, she knew she had to confront him again. She couldn't just leave this unanswered. But what would she find if she did? What other secrets was he hiding? Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Lila? She whipped around, her pulse quickening. There, standing in the doorway, was Daniel's older brother, James. His face was filled with concern, but there was also something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't as close to Lila as Daniel was, but they had spoken enough during the wedding planning for her to recognize the genuine worry on his face. "Lila, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and cautious, as though he wasn't sure if he should approach her. Lila wiped her tears away hastily, trying to compose herself. "I'm fine," she said, though the lie fell flat even to her own ears. James didn't seem convinced. He stepped forward, his gaze flicking to the door she had just come through. "I heard shouting. What's going on in there?" Lila's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, trying to figure out what to say. Her first instinct was to tell him everything, to let him in on the truth, but something stopped her. James was Daniel's brother. Would he believe her? Would he take her side? Instead, she took a deep breath and shook her head. I need some space. I don't want to talk about it." James's brow furrowed, but he didn't press further. "I get it," he said softly. "But you know you can always talk to me. If you need anything, I'm here." Lila nodded faintly, appreciating the gesture, but her mind was elsewhere. She needed answers, not sympathy. As James turned to go back inside, Lila felt a strange pang of guilt. James wasn't involved in any of this. He wasn't to blame. But she couldn't shake the feeling. That something about this whole situation wasn't right. And if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that Daniel wasn't the only one hiding things. The next morning, Lila didn't sleep a wink. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the events of the night over and over. The laughter. The mocking tone. Daniel's cold words. She felt like she was losing control of her own reality. She stayed up all night, pacing the room, trying to think of what to do next. Should she confront Daniel again? Should she leave him? Part of her wanted to pack her bags, walk away, and never look back. But something stopped her. The same need for answers, for closure, that had ignited in her last night, refused to go out. She had to know why. She had to understand how deep this betrayal ran. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a soft light across the room. Lila's eyes were bloodshot, her body heavy with exhaustion. But the weight of her emotions, the constant swirl of thoughts, kept her from resting. When she finally dragged herself out of bed, she made her way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet. She half expected to hear Daniel's voice, but there was only the sound of the distant ticking of a clock on the wall. Her stomach churned as she approached the kitchen. There, sitting at the counter, was James, sipping his coffee. His eyes flicked up when she entered, but he didn't say anything right away. "Morning," he said softly. Lila nodded in acknowledgement, but her mind was elsewhere. "Where's Daniel?" James set his cup down, his expression guarded. "He left early this morning for a meeting. He said it was urgent." Lila's heart skipped a beat. A meeting? So soon after last night? Something felt off about this. But she didn't say anything, at least, not yet. She had a plan forming in her mind, a plan that didn't involve confronting Daniel right away. If she could dig a little deeper, get a better sense of what was going on, maybe she could find the answers she needed without walking into another trap. "I see," she said quietly. "Thanks for letting me know." She turned to leave, but James stopped her. "Lila," he said, his voice hesitant, "I know things are complicated right now. But if you need help, I'm here for you. I just want you to know that." Lila paused at the door, unsure of what to say. Part of her wanted to confide in him, tell him what had happened the night before. But the other part of her was cautious. She didn't know if she could trust anyone in this house, not even him. There were too many unknowns, too many unanswered questions. "I appreciate it, James," she said quietly, before walking out the door. As the day went on, Lila found herself trapped in a cycle of thoughts. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was very wrong. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Daniel wasn't the only one keeping secrets. The entire family, his family, was involved in something dark, something sinister. But what? It wasn't until late in the afternoon that the first real clue fell into her lap. She had gone to the library in search of some peace and quiet, hoping to clear her mind. But as she moved past a stack of old books on a table, a folded piece of paper caught her eye. Curious, she picked it up, unfolding it slowly. It was a letter, handwritten, with no return address. The ink was smudged in places, as if the writer had been in a hurry. But the words were clear enough. "You know too much. If you go any further, you'll regret it. Stay away from the truth, Lila. Some things are better left buried." The letter sent a cold shiver down her spine. Someone was watching her. Someone knew she was digging into things. And they didn't want her to uncover what they were hiding. She crumpled the letter in her hand, her mind spinning. This wasn't just about a marriage gone wrong. This was bigger, much bigger. And it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. The letter she had found earlier that day burned a hole in Lila's mind. Its cryptic message echoed in her thoughts, haunting her every step. "You know too much. If you go any further, you'll regret it. Stay away from the truth, Lila. Some things are better left buried." Who had written it? And more importantly, what truth was she getting too close to? The warning, though ominous, only fueled her resolve to dig deeper. She had no idea what she was about to uncover, but she couldn't turn back now. There was a feeling inside her, something primal, that told her she was on the cusp of a discovery that would change everything. The house had grown eerily quiet since the morning. Daniel had not returned, and Lila hadn't heard from him at all. She wondered where he was, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to care. Her mind was focused on the puzzle before her, and she was determined to solve it, no matter the cost. The sun was setting as Lila sat in the living room, staring at the crumpled letter in her hand. The clock on the mantel ticked louder than usual in the silence, each second that passed seeming to stretch into eternity. Her fingers fidgeted with the edges of the paper, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Was it Daniel who had written the letter? Or was it someone else? And if it wasn't him, what was his role in all of this? How deep did this conspiracy run? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up to the driveway. She jumped to her feet, her heart racing in her chest. Could it be Daniel? Had he returned? She hesitated for a moment, then quickly moved to the window, her eyes scanning the driveway below. A black SUV was parked outside the estate, the engine still running. A man in a suit stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his tie as he made his way toward the door. Lila's pulse quickened when she recognized him. He was a man she had seen before, though she couldn't place where. He had an air of authority about him. His sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with an almost predatory gaze. Who was he? And why was he here? Lila's instincts screamed at her to hide, but her curiosity was stronger. She needed to know what was going on. She couldn't keep living in the dark, not with everything she had uncovered so far. Quietly, she slipped out of the living room and crept down the hallway, making her way toward the front door. As she peered through the crack in the door, she saw the man ring the bell, his movements deliberate and controlled. A moment later, the door opened, and Lila's heart skipped a beat when she saw who had answered it. James. She hadn't expected him to be the one to open the door, but there he was, his face betraying no emotion. He greeted the man with a stiff nod, and the two exchanged a few words Lila couldn't hear. But the body language between them told a story of familiarity. This wasn't a first-time meeting. Lila's mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he here? And why had James invited him in? She held her breath, her body tensed as she watched the exchange through the door. After a few moments, James stepped aside, and the man walked in. Lila quickly pulled away from the door, her heart thudding in her chest. She had to know what was going on, but how could she find out without drawing attention to herself? She turned on her heel and rushed back to the library, where she knew she would find something that might give her more answers. As she entered the room, her eyes immediately fell on the large desk in the corner. There, sitting on top of a pile of books, was an old, leather-bound journal. She hadn't noticed it earlier, but now it seemed to call to her. Lila moved toward the desk, her fingers trembling as she reached for the journal. It was heavy in her hands, the pages worn with age. She opened it slowly, the faint smell of old paper filling the air as she flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat and elegant, but as she read the first few lines, her stomach tightened with unease. The foundation of this family is built on lies. If I do not act quickly, everything will fall apart. The words on the page were a stark contrast to the life Lila had thought she was living. What foundation? What lies? She continued reading, her eyes scanning the pages faster now, each line revealing more and more of a story she wasn't prepared for. I have made arrangements for the future, but there is no going back now. My actions will have consequences, but I cannot let this continue. Not for me, not for anyone else. The truth must be revealed. The entries grew more cryptic, and Lila's heart pounded as she absorbed the implications. It seemed as though the author of this journal was preparing for something big. But what? Her fingers lingered on the page as she turned it, her breath catching when she saw a name written in bold, underlined letters, Daniel. Daniel. Her husband. The page had more to say. But her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the library. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Had someone heard her? She quickly closed the journal and slipped it back into its place, her heart racing as the footsteps drew closer. Lila quickly moved to the window and peeked outside. James was standing near the SUV, talking to the man in the suit. He seemed agitated, his hands moving in sharp gestures as he spoke. The other man's expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in the air between them, something that told Lila that whatever was happening here, it wasn't good. She watched them for a moment longer, trying to make sense of it all. What was James involved in? What kind of family was she married into? But her thoughts were cut short when she heard a voice behind her. Lila. She turned around to see James standing in the doorway, his expression guarded. There was something in his eyes that made her feel uneasy. Had he seen her snooping? She quickly composed herself, forcing a neutral expression. "James. I didn't expect to see you here." James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a few steps into the room, his eyes scanning the space as if looking for something. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Look, Lila," he began, his tone softer than before, "I know you're upset. I know you have questions, and I'm not going to lie to you. There's a lot going on that you don't understand. But you need to be careful." Lila's heart raced at his words. Be careful? What did that mean? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's going on here, James? What is all this?" James hesitated, his gaze shifting uneasily. "There are things happening in this family that, well, that you wouldn't believe if I told you. You've seen some of it, I know. But there's more. Much more. And I'm telling you this because I care about you. You're not ready for what's coming. No one is." Lila's confusion deepened. "What do you mean, James? What are you trying to warn me about?" But James didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back and placed his hand on the doorframe, his eyes darting around the room nervously. "You need to stay away from this. If you don't, you'll get caught up in something that could destroy everything." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Lila standing in the silence, her mind spinning. The warning was clear, but it only made her more determined. James knew something. And she was going to find out what. As the day stretched into evening, Lila knew one thing for certain: she was in way over her head. But she wasn't about to back down now. The more she learned, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. And with each new revelation, she realized that nothing, not even her marriage, was what it seemed. The house felt different now, like a living entity that was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lila couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every creak of the floorboards louder than before. The letters, the journal, and James's cryptic warnings were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly but surely coming together. But it was a puzzle that didn't make sense, one that left her grasping for answers, unsure of who she could trust. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the large bed that now felt like a cage. The silence was suffocating, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ominous message in the letter again: "You know too much. If you go any further, you'll regret it." But what was she supposed to do? She couldn't just turn away now. She needed to know the truth, about Daniel, about his family, about what was really happening behind the scenes. She had been married to Daniel for just over a year, but every day now felt like a lifetime. Each day, another layer of deception peeled away. The man she had loved, the man she thought she knew, was someone else entirely. The warning signs were all around her, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the life she had built for herself was based on lies. Lila sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She couldn't ignore it any longer. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. She needed answers. And she was going to find them, no matter the cost. The next morning, she woke up early, the faint light of dawn creeping through the curtains. The house was still quiet, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. Daniel hadn't come home yet, and it was beginning to feel like he was avoiding her. Was he out there hiding something? Or was he just as scared as she was? Lila dressed quickly, not bothering to do much with her hair or makeup. She had a plan. She was going to confront James again. He was the only one who seemed to know anything, and his cryptic warnings weren't enough. She needed more information. She needed to understand exactly what was going on. She walked down the hallway, past the large mirrors that reflected her anxious face. She passed the living room, the dining room, and the study, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. There was a strange quietness about the house now, a stillness that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. When Lila reached the study, she paused at the door. She knew James would be in there, likely going over paperwork or reviewing something. He was always the one to stay up late, working on something, while Daniel disappeared for hours without explanation. She knocked softly at the door, her hand trembling. "Come in," came James's voice from the other side. Lila pushed the door open slowly, stepping into the room. It smelled of old books and leather, a familiar scent that once gave her comfort. But today, it only made her feel uneasy. James was sitting behind a large wooden desk. His glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through a set of documents. When he looked up, there was a brief flash of surprise in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Lila, what brings you here this early?" he asked, his voice light, almost too light. "I need to talk to you," she said, her tone firm. She wasn't here for small talk or pleasantries. She was here for answers. "It's about the letter." James's face hardened at the mention of the letter, his eyes narrowing. "What letter?" he asked, though his voice betrayed him, giving away the fact that he knew exactly which letter she meant. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," she shot back, stepping closer to the desk. "The one I found in the library. The one that warned me to stop digging into this family's secrets." James leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. His expression was guarded, but Lila could see the tension in his jaw. "Lila, I told you before. You're not ready for this. You don't understand what you're getting into." "I don't need to understand. I need the truth," Lila said, her voice unwavering. "I'm done with the secrets. I want to know why this family is so messed up. Why is Daniel acting the way he is? What's going on here, James?" He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if fighting an internal battle. "You think you can handle the truth? Do you have any idea what you're asking for?" "I can handle it," she said with more conviction than she felt. "But I need you to be honest with me. What is happening here, James? What's Daniel hiding?" James hesitated for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the window, his gaze unfocused. Lila held her breath, waiting for him to speak. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was normal. Finally, James spoke, his voice low. "Daniel's involvement in this goes deeper than you realize. This isn't just about a marriage. It's about power. It's about money. And it's about control." Lila's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "Power? Money? What are you talking about? What does this family have to do with any of that?" James stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. "This isn't something you can just walk into, Lila," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "You've already seen too much, and now you're asking questions you're not prepared for. I told you to stay out of it." "Why?" she demanded. "Why can't I know? I'm married to him. I deserve to know what's going on, especially when it affects me. Why are you trying to protect me from the truth?" James took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I'm not trying to protect you, Lila. I'm trying to protect you from them." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "Them? Who are you talking about? What do you mean?" James looked at her, his eyes dark and filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "There are people in this family. People you don't know about. People you don't want to know about. And if you keep digging, if you keep asking questions, they will stop at nothing to make sure you don't get the answers you're looking for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lila's mind was spinning. Who were these people? And what was James trying to tell her? She had known something was off, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. "I can't protect you anymore, Lila," James said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're in too deep now. And if you don't back off, you'll be dragged into something that will destroy everything. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She was no longer just a passive observer in her own life. She was in the middle of something dangerous, something that could shatter everything she had ever known. But even as the fear settled into her bones, a spark of defiance ignited inside her. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to back down. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. "I'm not going anywhere, James," she said, her voice strong. "I'm not afraid of the truth. And I'm not afraid of them. But I am afraid of living the rest of my life in the dark." James didn't respond. Instead, he turned his back to her, walking toward the door with heavy steps. "You've made your choice," he said quietly. "But just remember this, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." With that, he left the room, leaving Lila standing alone, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of his words pressed down on her like 1,000 tons of stone, but she knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. She was going to uncover the truth. No matter what it cost. The days after her conversation with James were a blur. Lila had been on edge, every moment filled with a sense of impending doom. Each glance over her shoulder, every creak of the house seemed to confirm what James had said: she was in too deep. The world around her had shifted, and she was no longer living in the life she had imagined for herself. Her marriage, her home, everything had begun to feel like a carefully constructed facade, one that was slowly crumbling under the weight of secrets. The silence in the house was suffocating. Daniel hadn't come home since the night of their fight, and she hadn't heard a word from him. She didn't know if he was avoiding her or if something more sinister was at play. The only people she saw were the servants, who were all too careful not to ask questions or offer any real conversation. They acted like they were afraid to look her in the eye, as if they knew more than they were letting on. Lila knew she couldn't continue living like this, waiting, wondering, and fearing. She had to take control, even if it meant diving headfirst into a world of danger she didn't fully understand. That morning, after hours of restless sleep, she decided to take matters into her own hands. There was one person left who she hadn't approached yet. The one person who might hold the key to all the answers: the family lawyer, Mr. Carrington. Lila had heard his name mentioned before, in passing, always in hushed tones. He was the one who had drawn up the family's contracts, the legal papers that bound them to their wealth and power. He was a quiet man, rarely seen outside of his office, but from what Lila had gathered, he was deeply involved in the family's business dealings. If there was anyone who knew the truth about Daniel's past, and, more importantly, about the shady dealings she had begun to suspect, Mr. Carrington was the man to ask. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down her dress with shaky hands. She had a plan. She was going to confront him. She was going to demand answers. The drive to Mr. Carrington's office was long and silent, the weight of her decision heavy in her chest. The further she got from the house, the more liberated she felt, as though the walls that had been closing in on her were finally starting to loosen. But she couldn't allow herself to feel too relieved. She had no idea what awaited her once she stepped inside the lawyer's office. She could only hope that he would be willing to talk, or that she would be able to extract the truth from him, one way or another. The office was located in the heart of the city, tucked away in a quiet building that screamed of old money and power. The moment Lila walked through the heavy doors, she felt a chill settle over her. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and leather, and the walls were lined with rows of legal books. Behind the front desk, a receptionist looked up, her expression impassive. "How may I help you?" the receptionist asked in a professional tone, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she sized Lila up. "I need to speak with Mr. Carrington," Lila said, her voice steady despite the nervousness bubbling up inside her. "It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated, glancing at her computer screen. "Mr. Carrington is available for appointments, but I'll need to check his schedule first." Lila felt her patience slipping away. "Tell him it's about the Thornton family," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. She immediately regretted it. The Thornton family name carried weight, and she knew that mentioning it would make the receptionist more likely to give her a pass to see the lawyer. But she also knew it would alert the wrong people. The receptionist's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked her surprise. "Very well. Please wait here." Lila didn't sit. She stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling street below, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this entire situation had become. She had no idea what she was walking into. But she was too far gone to turn back now. After what felt like an eternity. The receptionist finally returned with a faint smile on her lips. "Mr. Carrington will see you now." Lila nodded, her pulse quickening. She followed the receptionist down a long hallway to an office at the end. The door was solid wood, with a brass nameplate that read, "Harold Carrington, Esq." The receptionist knocked once, then opened the door, gesturing for Lila to enter. Mr. Carrington sat behind a large mahogany desk, his gray hair neatly combed, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked like a man who had seen and done it all, but there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. "Miss Thornton, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice smooth, though there was an edge to it. "Please, have a seat." Lila didn't sit. She stood, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm not here for pleasantries," she said, her voice firm. "I need answers. About the family. About Daniel." Carrington raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a direct approach. "Answers," he repeated, as if the word tasted strange on his tongue. "Miss Thornton, I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean." Lila didn't waste time. She moved closer, her eyes narrowing as she stared him down. "You know exactly what I mean," she said. "I know there are things going on behind closed doors, things that you're hiding. I'm not leaving here until you tell me the truth." For a moment, Carrington remained silent, his gaze unwavering. Then, he sighed, removing his glasses and setting them on the desk. "Miss Thornton, I would advise you to be careful. There are things you don't understand, things that you can't unsee once you've seen them." Lila's resolve hardened. "Tell me what I don't understand. Tell me everything." Carrington leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. He studied her for a long time, as if weighing the consequences of what he was about to say. Finally, he spoke. "You want to know about your husband, don't you?" he said, his voice laced with something darker, something more sinister than she had anticipated. "You want to know why he's been acting the way he has, why he's been hiding things from you. But let me be clear, what you're asking for isn't just information. It's a doorway into a world you're not prepared to enter." Lila's breath hitched in her throat. "What world? What are you talking about?" Carrington paused again, his eyes flickering to the door as if he were ensuring they were alone. Then he leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Your husband's family is involved in things that no one should ever be involved in," he said. "Their wealth, their power, it's not what you think. It's built on corruption, on betrayal, and on blood. The Thornton name isn't one you should be proud of, Lila. It's a curse." Lila's heart raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What do you mean, blood?" she asked, her voice shaking. Carrington's expression grew darker, and for the first time, Lila saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "There are things, Miss Thornton, that this family has done to stay at the top. The price of their power was paid in ways you couldn't possibly imagine. Your husband, Daniel, he is tied to a legacy of violence, of manipulation, of murder." The words hit Lila like a punch to the stomach. Murder? How could this be true? She felt like the ground beneath her was slipping away. Everything she had thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her future, it was all falling apart. "Why are you telling me this?" Lila managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Carrington leaned back in his chair, his eyes hardening once more. "Because you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to understand that if you push any further, there's no going back. They will come for you, just as they've come for others who've tried to uncover the truth. And when they come, you won't be able to escape." Lila's mind was spinning. This was more than she could have ever imagined. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to stop now. She had come this far. And now, she needed to know everything. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Lila's hands were trembling as she left Mr. Carrington's office. His words still echoed in her mind, "If you push any further, they will come for you." He had painted a picture of a family built on secrets, betrayal, and bloodshed, darker than anything she could have imagined. But the more he warned her, the more resolute she became. She couldn't back down. She couldn't live a life of ignorance, not when the truth was so close. The drive back to the mansion was a blur. The air outside felt thick, oppressive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Every street corner seemed like a trap, every shadow like an ominous prelude to what was to come. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was watching her. When she arrived at the mansion, she didn't bother going through the front entrance. She knew that if Daniel was home, he would be in his study, hiding from the truth as he always did. She wasn't going to wait for him. She wasn't going to let him control the narrative any longer. Lila had made up her mind. She was going to confront him, once and for all. The large, looming house seemed to grow darker the closer she got. The once majestic pillars, the gleaming windows, everything that had once represented her dream life now felt cold and foreboding. The family she had married into wasn't the picture-perfect image she had imagined. It was something far more dangerous, far more sinister. Lila's footsteps echoed through the vast hallways as she moved deeper into the mansion. Her heart was pounding, her pulse quickening. She had no idea what she would find, but she couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to leave until she had them. As she approached Daniel's study, she hesitated for a brief moment. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. What would she say to him? What if he denied everything? What if he turned on her? But she couldn't let fear control her. Not anymore. She pushed open the door with a quiet creak, stepping into the room. It was dimly lit, with the faint glow of a desk lamp casting shadows across the walls. Daniel was sitting at his desk, his back to her, completely absorbed in the papers in front of him. "Daniel," Lila said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of urgency. He didn't turn around. "Lila," he said, his voice cold, distant. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to talk," she said, taking a step closer. "We need to talk." Daniel sighed, putting down the papers and turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something dark, behind his eyes. "There's nothing to talk about." Lila crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Don't lie to me, Daniel. I know everything. I know what's been going on. I know about the family. I know about the secrets." At that, Daniel stiffened, his jaw tightening. For a moment, Lila thought he might deny it, but then his expression shifted, faint but unmistakable, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even angry. He was resigned. "You shouldn't have found out," he said, his voice low, almost defeated. "It was never meant for you to know." "Why?" she demanded. "Why all the lies? Why did you keep me in the dark? All this time, I've been living in a house built on blood and deceit. I deserve the truth." Daniel's gaze darkened. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. He looked at her as though he were seeing her for the first time. The truth, he repeated. You think you want the truth, Lila? You have no idea what it would cost you. Lila took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Tell me, she said, her voice firm. Tell me everything. I'm not leaving until I know the truth. Daniel's eyes flickered with something, anger, regret, fear? It was hard to tell. He stepped away from the desk and moved toward the bookshelf, pulling out a large, old leather-bound book. The book was worn and heavy, like it had been handled too many times. He opened it slowly, his fingers brushing the pages like they held the answers to everything. This, Daniel said, his voice soft, almost reverent, is the story of my family. It's not something I've ever wanted you to know. It's a history of power, of violence, and of betrayal. The Thornton name, it's built on bloodshed. Every generation has sacrificed something, someone, so that the rest of us could live in comfort. We've done terrible things to stay on top. And now, you're part of it. Lila's heart raced. She was standing on the precipice of something far darker than she had ever imagined. What do you mean, sacrificed someone? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and cold determination. It's not just money and power, Lila. It's survival. The Thornton family has always controlled everything, the land, the wealth, the influence. But we've always had to pay the price. My father, he did things, unspeakable things, to ensure that our legacy would continue. And I've done the same. Lila felt a chill creep up her spine. What kind of things? What do you mean? Daniel's expression hardened, and for the first time, Lila saw the true extent of the darkness in his eyes. I've made deals, Lila. With people you'll never understand. The wealth, the power, it's all tied to them. The family's survival depends on it. And if you keep digging, you'll be forced to make a choice. A choice? Lila echoed, her heart pounding. What kind of choice? The kind of choice that means life or death, Daniel said, his voice flat, emotionless. The kind of choice that will tear you apart, Lila. There's no escaping it. Once you know the truth, you can't walk away. Lila's stomach churned. Are you saying you've killed people? She asked, her voice shaking. Are you admitting that? Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, he said, his voice barely audible. We've done terrible things. We've killed to protect the family, to protect our legacy. And if you continue down this path, you'll become a part of it. You'll be forced to make a choice. Lila's mind was reeling. She felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. The man she had married, the man she had loved, was a monster. The family she had become a part of was even worse than she could have imagined. The weight of the truth crushed her, but at the same time, something deep inside her refused to accept it. No, she said, shaking her head. I won't be a part of this. I won't live in the shadows of your lies. Daniel's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You don't have a choice, he said, his voice cold. Once you know the truth, you're already a part of it. You'll either walk away, or you'll be destroyed. Lila's mind raced as she tried to process everything. The truth was more horrifying than she could have imagined. But there was one thing she knew for sure, she couldn't live a life of fear and deception any longer. She had come too far to turn back now. I won't be destroyed, Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her chest. I'm done with this life. I'm done with you. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You think you can just walk away? He asked, his voice dripping with contempt. You're wrong. There's no escape. Not now. Lila turned and walked toward the door, her resolve stronger than ever. Watch me, she said over her shoulder. As she stepped out of the study, she knew that her life would never be the same. The truth had changed everything. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. And no matter what it took, she would escape the nightmare that was the Thornton family. This is the final part of the story, wrapping up Lila's journey of discovery and confronting the dark truth of her marriage and the Thornton family. The stakes are at their highest, and Lila's decision to break free from the life she once knew marks a powerful moment of defiance and survival. The journey has come to an end, but Lila's future remains uncertain, full of possibilities, both terrifying and liberating.